Good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming to tonight's event. So this is the public element of a three-day workshop that I've organized with Marta, and I'm going to get her name wrong, but Wojciechowska, Joe Hoover from Queen Mary, Marta from King's College London, and James Hickson from the Heseltine Institute, University of Manchester. And we're grateful for Queen Mary, King's, and LSE Cities for supporting this workshop and tonight's discussion. The workshop brings together political and legal theorists and activists from across Europe, the US, and beyond to explore relations between cities, nations, democracy, and authoritarianism. Before I introduce our speakers and tell you how the evening is going to run, I want to say a bit more about the focus of the conference and the questions we want to explore tonight with our speakers, but also with all of you. A few months ago, a meeting took place in the White House between the President of the United States and the Mayor of New York. This was in some ways a sort of extraordinary encounter. They might have both been New Yorkers, but the contrast between the two of them in terms of age, character, and politics could hardly have been greater. Yet in some ways, it's also all too typical. We live in an increasingly authoritarian age. According to the Varieties of Democracy report, in 2005, so what is that? 20 years ago, roughly 50% of the world lived under autocracies. Today, that figure is 74%. And much of that growth has come in the emergence of electoral autocracies, regimes that allow voting while suppressing freedom of speech and association, severely limiting independent media, and persecuting opposition leaders, and in other ways tilting the playing field to ensure that the opposition cannot realistically win. Cities, by contrast, are often seen as a source of an alternative, more democratic politics in the face of this rising tide of authoritarianism. Again and again, we see cities leading on climate change, support for refugees, social inclusion, democratic innovation, human rights, and the rule of law. And leading, of course, taking a stand and leading opposition to these autocrats. And this they're building on a long tradition. This is nothing new. Remember that the constitutional citizen government as we know it today was first established by cities in the ancient world and in the Italian medieval city-states. And in the 19th century, it was often cities rather than nation states that led the way on establishing social housing, health, and other welfare services. Indeed, with cities increasingly building international networks and taking a sort of more prominent role on the world stage, some theorists like Benjamin Barber have predicted that progressive cities will gradually outflank reactionary nation states as the major powers on the globe. And yet, it could be argued that cities themselves are in some ways heavily implicated in today's authoritarian politics. Cities have become centers of great wealth and inequality, perhaps fueling the rejection of the status quo and support for populist and authoritarian parties, both in cities but especially beyond. The revenge of left-behind places, the revenge of the flyover states. And let's be realistic. Even the most powerful cities have nothing of the power of nation states. It feels that there's a sort of limited amount that they can really do to change the fundamentals of the world. So it's against this background that we've convened this workshop. Some of the questions that our workshop has been exploring include, are there distinct urban values, urban versions of democracy, equality, freedom, and community, different from national ones? How should we be describing relationships between cities and democracies? Is it a matter of potentiality? I mean, some of our participants have talked about the cities as having democratic potential, or can we say something stronger? Can we talk about cities having a disposition or sort of bent towards democracy, or can we talk about trends and patterns, or even democratic destiny? What is it about cities that explain their apparently more democratic character? Is it just demographics? Is it just that people who support democracy move to cities and live in cities? Or is it something about living together in high density but diverse communities that makes the difference? Or is it something about the way that they're planned and designed? And finally, and most fundamentally, what can we do to strengthen and mobilize urban democracy in an authoritarian age? And I think I just want to add one point, which is not in my notes, but that we are political theorists, and in thinking about taking an interest in cities, we're doing something relatively new or relatively uncommon. I mean, for the most part, particularly in the Anglophone world, political theorists and political philosophers have just not been very interested in cities. They've tended to view cities as perhaps less powerful, smaller versions of nation states, or simply as a sort of lower tier unit of public administration. And I think there's a sort of growing interest and movement of which this convening is a part to change that and take cities seriously from a political theory point of view. So that's all by way of preamble. The way this evening is going to work is we're going to hear from our our panelists, and then I'll facilitate a short discussion among them, and then I'll open it up to the floor for questions, well, from the floor and from our online audience. There's no fire alarm test, so if you hear an alarm, it's the real thing, and please do turn off your phones. Right, finally to our panelists. The bad news is that Femke Halsema, the mayor of Amsterdam, has understandably been, not only couldn't come to London, but has just been called into an emergency meeting in Amsterdam because of the heat wave, and they're expected to have even hotter heat tomorrow. So she's not going to be here. But we're very lucky. There you are, come up. To have Doutje Lettinga, who's Amsterdam's chief scientific officer. Yes, so we're going to have to sort of take an extra space. Amsterdam's chief scientific officer and a professor at the University of Amsterdam with specializing in human rights and urban justice. So she's going to speak for the mayor and then join in the panel discussion. Then we've got Sheila Foster in the middle, professor of climate at Columbia University, and also one of the co-chairs of the New York Climate Change Panel. I hope I've got that right. And Sheila's well known for her work on environmental and climate justice, land use, local government, and urban policy. And she co-directs LabGov, which works with cities and civil society to promote collaborative, community-oriented urban governance in the US and beyond. And she also worked with the aforementioned Benjamin Barber to set up the Global Parliament of Mayors. Lastly, Avner de Shalat. Avner is a political philosopher and previously Max Kampelman Chair of Democracy and Human Rights at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, with a long interest. I mean, it's unusual amongst political philosophers in having a long interest in cities. His most recent book, co-authored with Professor Jonathan Wolff, who is here on the front row, City of Equals, is viewed by many of us as a landmark book in urban political theory. And Avner is also an activist working with Palestinians and others in Jerusalem and beyond to secure a just and peaceful settlement of Israeli-Palestine conflicts. So that is how it's all going to work. That's who we are. So I'm going to hand over to Doutje, who's going to speak on behalf of Femke.
Yes. Shall I stand there?
Yeah.
So once again, also apologize on behalf of Femke. She really wanted to come here, but suddenly at 5 o'clock, the heat wave made a code red in our city, and she needs to be in meetings for emergency measures, basically to protect also the vulnerable groups in our society. So I guess that's a good reason, and I will do my best to represent her. So if I'm saying I in my speech, it's Femke who is actually saying this. So in 2001, UN Secretary General Kofi Annan declared, "The world has entered the urban millennium." After decades of 20th century decline, cities re-emerged as centers of growth and innovation. There were even signs of urban hubris, as reflected in book titles such as Triumph of the City and If Mayors Ruled the World, where our panelists has contributed to. Cities like London and Amsterdam thrived economically and culturally. attracting not only private investment, but also academics, thinkers, and public intellectuals who drive innovation and a vibrant public debate. At the same time, city governments failed to successfully address rising inequalities, soaring living costs, and the growing divide between urban and rural areas. As sociologist Saskia Sassen wrote in 2015, cities are the spaces where those without power get to make history and a culture, thereby making their powerlessness complex. Then came June 23, 2016. You all know what happened. 52% of British voters chose Brexit. Months later, Americans elected a xenophobic, misogynist bully as their president. These events exposed a deep divide between cities like New York or London and the rest of the country, fueled by populist narratives exploiting inequality and cultural anxiety. Back then, many dismissed Brexit as a cry for attention and Trump's election as a one-off. But 10 years later, almost nobody denies that these were milestone moments in recent history. To me, Femke, they marked the rise of new enemies of the open society, the concept developed by Karl Popper. Based on his theory of scientific knowledge, Popper argues against all philosophies that present history's course as predetermined, predestined, or inevitable, and against the idea that absolute truth exists. In science, knowledge must be acquired through falsification, and in society, progress can only be achieved by trial and error, by democratic debate, individual liberty, the institutions of the rule of law, critical journalism, and academia. The opposite of an open society is, of course, a closed society, marked by authoritarianism and tribalism. In tribes, as understood by Popper, all social relations are fixed at birth, and all truth is what the tribe's leader says it is, or it is fixed by rituals and taboos. The form of society provides a strong sense of community, reliability, and security to its members, but at the same time, it does not allow for change and progress. Conflicts between tribes are almost always resolved through violence, and individual liberty is sacrificed for the interest of the collective, as defined by the tribe's ruler, and that's often a man with far too much machismo. I'm very proud that we have a female mayor. Today, nationalistic populists are the new tribesmen. They dismantle democratic institutions under the pretext of representing the real people. They present to the electorate a false promise of a return to the community and a security of a past that has never existed. They abuse and misrepresent religious beliefs and traditional values to target queer individuals, women, migrants, journalists, scientists, teachers, artists, lawyers, judges, and, as mayors from Minneapolis, Istanbul, Budapest, and other many cities knows, also the freedom of cities. Cities thrive on freedom and democracy. That's why municipal governments should speak out against nationalistic populism. But we must not talk about cities as islands of democracy and pit our cities against national governments. To uphold democracy is the ultimate act of patriotism. So, cities must adopt 3 strategies to defend freedom and democracy against authoritarian populism. First, pragmatism. Local governments are close to the real problems of citizens and must deliver real solutions to these problems. Second, strengthen local democracy and civil society. Cities must grow democratic practices, not just defend existing institutions. Third, values. Leaders must uphold open society principles, locally, nationally, and globally. Let's start with pragmatism. Local governments are closest to the problems of citizens. When I, Femke, step outside my home and I see a dirty street, unsafe traffic, or violence, I feel directly responsible. If local governments fail to solve these issues, we lose credibility and trust. A reliable government delivers essential services, safety, clean streets, education. And it must also tackle inequality, which erodes social cohesion and fuels populism. But this only works if local governments trust their citizens. That's why the second strategy is to expand local democracy and civic participation. Dutch historian Maarten Prak, in his book Citizens Without Nations, shows how cities pioneered local self-governance long before we had national parliaments. In Amsterdam, for example, guilds and charity organizations and civic guards were powerful institutions completely run by citizens, although I must say that women, Jews and other minorities were often excluded from these organizations. His idea of a multi-level form of citizenship could combine local strengths, equality and freedom with broader democratic systems. In Amsterdam, I've seen a surge in citizen-led initiatives, neighborhood platforms, energy cooperatives, housing collectives, community centers. These groups reconnect with alienated communities. They are key to countering populism, fueled by a retreating welfare state, globalization, inequality and rapid change. By restoring civic life, we can rebuild community and give citizens a realistic way to take back control. Local democracy is the answer. Third, cities must stand firmly for open society values. Progress comes through trial, error and debate. Combating intolerance, intolerance without becoming intolerant. Our cities must have zero tolerance for xenophobia, racism, misogyny and queerphobia. Mayors like Budapest, Gergely Kavkasjoy, and Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey have stood against authoritarianism by defying Pride March bans or resisting ICA raids. And let's not forget London. In that tumultuous year of 2016, Sadiq Khan became mayor. For a decade, he stood against hate, extremism, and even tech giants, all while championing civic engagement. I believe mayors must stand together against populist attacks. And that is why in 2019, the mayors of Budapest, Bratislava, Prague, and Warsaw founded the Pact of Free Cities, a network defending democratic values and the rule of law. Today's cities worldwide from Los Angeles to London to Taipei, have joined. And next year, Amsterdam will host its summit, proving our collective resolve. Dear Ben, Sheila and Avner and friends, Karl Popper wrote, "We can return to the beasts, but if we wish to remain human, then there is only one way, the way to into the open society. We must go into the unknown, the uncertain and insecure, using what reason we may have to plan as well we can for both security and freedom." End of quote. History is open-ended, and that's a hopeful idea. It means that progress is always possible. It is our duty to pursue it. Freedom and democracy are the lifebloods of cities. Yet powerful forces are trying to suffocate them. Hiding won't work. The time for appeasing fearmongers and bullies is over. The moment to stand together and more united is now. I'm thrilled we are doing that here tonight. Thank you.
Sheila, you were up there. Yeah.
Okay, sure.
So Sheila, and Sheila's going to talk to us about how she thinks about relationships between cities and democracy.
In some ways from the belly of the beast, right, in the States. So thank you, and thank the mayor for us. So what I want to do is take forward, but also pull back a little bit from this idea that, you know, we have a long tradition of thinking about and treating the city as a more authentic site of democratic life, and thinking about urban citizenship and the way that we exist in cities through shared spaces and daily proximity to difference, right? Not abstract shared identity. And I think this is real, that, you know, cities can be on the progressive frontier. As a trained lawyer, one of the other ways I think about cities is that cities are creatures, and Ben talked about this, of a higher authority almost everywhere in the world. And that subordination isn't just a legal or technical point. In an authoritarian moment, and we've seen this in the US, it's a lever. Hostile national governments can and do push unpopular policy down through cities while shifting accountability with it. So the romance of the city as a democratic frontier is a normative claim, it's not a description. And so in the US, what are we seeing, right? We're seeing a wave of largely what we call blue cities, progressive cities, New York, Washington, DC, Seattle, that have just elected democratic socialist mayors, right? Sharply left mayors, and Los Angeles is likely to follow. And this is not kind of background noise. This is a backlash, actually, a clear backlash. And in some sense, you might say it's cities doing what they've historically done in moments of national drift. In the US, we have this idea of cities as laboratories of democracy, particularly when politics of the national level has foreclosed. And for this reason, radical municipalism has a history, right? It's a long history. And I think this is, in the US at least, a new chapter, explained, explicitly framed, I should say, as a resistance to Trumpism. But there are limits. You know, cities can be laboratories of democracy, but in the US, and what we've seen is, you know, the US federal government, while they can't commandeer cities directly to enforce Trump's immigration policy, they can starve cities through the spending clause. They cannot send money. They can bring lawsuits against sanctuary cities, and they can deploy ICE directly into resistant cities. And every one of these new democratic socialist mayors is discovering or will discover the same thing on roughly the same timeline. As charismatic as Mayor Mamdani is, charisma and a mandate are not legal authority. So what separates mayors who are successfully pushing back effectively from those who don't? It's not formal power. I think we've settled that. That's roughly equal and roughly weak almost everywhere. What I want to suggest is the variable is whether the mayor has built what I call a democratic commons. Durable institutional infrastructure, could be participatory budgeting, could be civic offices, could be standing mechanisms for organized engagement, that is able to turn their constituency into political leverage that travels upward. Traveling upward means a mayor's authority is usually normally understood as coming down from Albany in the case of New York, Westminster here. But a democratic commons reverses that direction. When a constituency, like I'm going to argue Mamdani has, is visibly, continuously, and organizationally assembled, not just polled, not just a voting bloc, but present, that assembled public becomes a political cost that a governor, in the case of New York governor, or president, has to price in before acting. In other words, the mayor isn't borrowing power from above, the public is generated from below, and the mayor is the conduit. So Mamdani's office of public or of mass engagement, the way he communicates with his citizens, his commitments around participation are not just symbolic, they're the machinery that makes the public legible as a standing political force, not just an electorate that showed up. That's why he can show up in Trump's office and call Trump an authoritarian to his face and still be able to go back to New York and govern. It's also why he can negotiate with the New York state governor for universal pre-K commitments, a pied-à-terre tax, and housing allocations, rather than have that governor simply override him the way past New York governors overrode Mayor Bloomberg and Mayor de Blasio. So let me give you a three-city contrast real quickly and then end, just to see this in action. So federal hostility is real, funding threats, sanctuary suits, but it's being absorbed in New York, in part because of what I just said by Mamdani, not capitulated to because the public backing him is institutionally anchored and visible. We have not seen ICE in New York like Los Angeles and Minneapolis had. We have not had severe budget cuts. Los Angeles, you may recall, among the most aggressive ICE deployments anywhere, direct federal confrontation, real political and physical resistance in the street, but without the standing institutional infrastructure that was able to convert that resistance into a mayor's negotiating leverage. And in Minneapolis, as we saw, quite inspirationally, there was civic energy. The public came together, but without the anchorage. So the neighborhood networks, the real mobilization against ICE, never routed itself through City Hall as organized political capital. And Mayor Frey's rhetoric outpaced his infrastructure. And as a result, the mayor and the governor of that state are in court because Trump has weaponized the Justice Department against them. So the pattern across all three, federal hostility is roughly constant. What varies and what determines whether resistance compounds into durable leverage or just gets absorbed is whether there's an institutionalization of collective constituent power doing the converting, what I call the democratic commons. Now, I'll close with this. I don't want to be romantic about this, because a democratic commons built on one administration's choices can be enclosed and wiped away by the next one. And so durability requires something more, legal embedding or cities banding together in the way that the mayor talked about, city-to-city networks, partnerships across borders, and funding mechanisms that aren't totally relying on the federal government. No single city can completely outmaneuver a hostile national government. So my answer isn't that cities are inherently more democratic than nations, it's that they're laboratories. And like any laboratory, what they produce depends entirely on whether anyone bothered to build the equipment before the experiment got urgent. Thanks.
Hi, good evening, good afternoon. I'd like to start by a personal remark, and Ben said it's okay that I do it. So I'm from Israel. Somebody had to be, and I volunteered. And I do want to say that I appreciate the fact that you invited me, despite the fact that I'm from Israel, because I know that some people think that this is something that shouldn't be done, and I appreciate the separation between any criticism of the government of Israel and how you relate to scholars from Israel. So I was invited as a scholar rather than as an Israeli. And despite the fact that in the last 3 years I've been doing everything I can in my capacity as a citizen to resist the war and to try to persuade the government to stop the hostilities, I'm aware of and I acknowledge the harm that my government has done to other people, and therefore I'm truly thankful for you for deciding to invite me, and I hope that very soon we'll see justice, equality, and liberty in my region to all nations. So that's a personal thing, and now I'm into the topic. So when we think about cities and their potential to protect liberalism and democracy, I think the first thing we have to realize is that we've been stuck in one notion of separation of power, which is horizontal. So there's the government, the parliament, and the court, the judiciary. But there's another form of separation of power, which is vertical, especially in federal states. So you have the federal state, then you have the region or the state, and then you have the city. And I think that's very important because it separates power in a way that offers cities opportunities to pursue policies which differ from the policies of the state, especially in countries like Brazil and Spain, where it's in the constitution that they should have their powers. So that's one thing. The other thing is that we have to realize that, I think, Ben, you mentioned this earlier, that many people think of the state, of the city as a mini state, but in fact it's very wrong to think about it as a mini state. There are very different institutions, and also socially speaking, there are very different organisms, if you want. So one thing is that the function of the state, or the rationale of the state, as Hobbes and Locke and Rousseau and others taught us, is to protect individuals, first of all from enemies from outside, but also from each other and from the church and other organizations and so on. So states build fences around individuals, and they are very keen on protecting the individuals from others. And the fences are laws and human rights and so on. The rationale of the city is completely different. It's about connecting people. Everything the municipality does is about connecting people. So when the municipality paves a sidewalk or a new street, it's about connecting. When the municipality subsidized open-air concerts, it's about connecting. And the same goes for subsidizing activities for children after school, or for any event that you can think of, summer festivals and so on. So it's all about how do we live together, and in fact, it reflects a very notion of politics. So we have two ideas or perception of what politics is. Politics can be very antagonistic. It's about who gets what and how and when. And I guess that's a very accurate picture of what's going on the state level. But there's another notion of politics, which is, okay, we have all these differences, ethnic, religious, gender, what have you. And the question is, how the hell do we live together despite all these differences? So you can think about politics in this way, and I think this characterizes politics on the city level. And so democracy is built into the way people think about politics on the city level or on the urban level. Just to give you an example, so in Copenhagen they have 412 kilometers of bike lanes. Cool, right? So they changed, when Tina Sabi was the chief architect there, they changed the sensitivity of the traffic lights from being sensitive to the average speed of the car to being sensitive to the average speed of bikes. So if you rode your bike to work, you could enjoy the green light and reach work before the guy who drove the car. And indeed, a lot of people changed their habits and started to ride the bikes. And they thought, oh, that's cool, you know, I see my neighbor riding next to me and so on. And what Sabi tells us is that a year later they found out that this affected their habits of being outside on the street with their kids, with their children in the afternoon. So the amount of time that they spent outside increased dramatically because of this. So again, connecting people, giving them opportunities to be together. And another beautiful example, Vienna found out that women use the parks less than men do, because men bring their balls and they play football or what have you, and women are less likely to play it. So they put lots of volleyball nets in the parks. And all of a sudden you have so many women coming to play volleyball in Vienna's parks. So again, this is about connecting. So indeed, if you are born in England, you're very likely to remain in England or in Britain. And we all talk about immigration, but there aren't that many immigrants who migrate outside of their countries. But it's not the case with the city. A city is like a strainer. People come in and go out, and you change your address, and you go to study somewhere else, and then you come back, and you follow your lover, and what have you. So the city is eager to keep you there. So again, it offers you to participate in the way the city is run. So again, democracy is built into the city. And they want you to enjoy the urban vibe, right? Living in the city can be fun. It's quite ridiculous to say that living in Britain or Israel is fun. But it does make sense to say that London is fun, that London is cool. Or you say, I love Berlin, and that's nice. But if you say, I love Germany, it sounds a bit odd. Or if you say, I love London, that's fine. If you say, I love England or Britain, you probably vote for Farage. So, I shouldn't say this. Okay. So, my point is that there's a lot of pro-democracy attitudes which are built into the way cities run because the cities have very different interests than the states and their rationale is very different. So, is it true that cities are more liberal than states? I come from a non-liberal city. I come from Jerusalem. We have a majority of people who are religious, conservative, and vote for the right-wing parties, and even among the Arabs, who are 38% of the population of Jerusalem, you have a lot of religious and conservative people. And even despite this, I would say that Jerusalem is many times more liberal than the state. I'll just give you one example. There is a beautiful project that the mayor of Jerusalem, who is a religious right-wing person, started in East Jerusalem, which is Palestinian. It's called ISTEC, E-A-S-T-EC, right? You can Google it up. And it's a beautiful initiative that is meant to offer Palestinians a chance to switch jobs from, being, bureaucrats or merchants to working in high-tech. So it's teaching them about how to compete for jobs in high-tech. We have a lot of evidence from elsewhere. If you compare the voting for Trump versus the voting for Harris in Texas, it's amazing. So 56% of Texas voted for Trump, but in Dallas, 60% voted for Harris. And the same goes for Austin and other big cities in Texas. A few years ago, the Supreme Court in Germany, the federal court, announced that it was illegal to circumcise people because it's irreversible damage to the body of the baby without getting consent. And Berlin said, oh my God, we have so many Muslims and Jews in our city, what do we do? And it took them a day or two to announce that they don't agree with the Supreme Court and you can circumcise your child in Berlin. Now, it doesn't matter whether you agree with the circumcision or not, but the fact is that Berlin challenged the federal court of Germany. And think about the C40 and the sanctuary cities organization. So cities get organized to protect their liberal values. Should I stop now, or do you want me to?
Go ahead. Keep
Okay,
going.
so just one.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Everyone else has been so well behaved that you can be a bit go with the time.
I'll be the naughty guy. So no, just one point. It's also thinking about local versus thinking about national and global interests. When you switch from thinking like a state to thinking like a city, you see things differently. And I'll just give you very briefly the following story. So 2015, I was teaching a course in the Free University of Berlin, and you remember there was a flow of migrants from Syria to Europe. I think 200,000 immigrants came to Munich, which was a big surprise in one summer. And I thought, okay, this is a good opportunity to start talking to people about what their attitudes towards immigration is, and then maybe I'll have a book. So the first person I interviewed was a father who accompanied his son to school. And I said, what do you think about immigrants? And he gave me all the slogans. They rape our daughters, they exploit our welfare system, they bring values with which we don't agree, etc., etc. And I was kind of, okay, can you tell me about an example of how you encountered immigrants? And he said, of course, yes. Only yesterday did I bring my child to school like I did today. And there was a child crying in the playground of the school. And I asked my child, why is he crying? And my child said, well, he's from Kosovo, his parents came from Kosovo, and he doesn't have friends, he's crying all the time. So I told my son, that's the interviewee tells me, I told my son, then don't just stand here, go and invite him to our home, we'll give him good time, I'll cook dinner for you, you'll prepare homework with him, you'll be his friend. And I asked myself, what's going on? The person has just told me how immigrants rape their daughters and exploit the welfare system, and now he's telling me how he went out of his way to help the immigrant. And the reason is that he changed from thinking like a state, where the immigrant is an abstract entity, it's about statistics, 20% of the jobs, 20% of the homes, I don't know what, to thinking like a city where the immigrant is the shopkeeper who sells you Asian food, it's the nurse who came from Ghana and works in the clinic, it's the bus driver whom you see every morning. So it's a concrete flesh and blood person. And this changes our minds to think in a very different and more friendly way to immigrants and in a more liberal way about our values. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Wonderful. Okay, we're going to have a discussion amongst ourselves, but I will soon open it up to the floor and up to our online guests, attendees. Two questions. I mean, and don't have to answer both of them, and or you can have a go at both. One is, what is it about cities that might explain why they do seem to be more democratic? And Abner, you've begun to reflect a bit on that. But I mean, even if it's about Sheila, even if it's about sort of mobilizing support for democracy, it feels like something inherent in cities that you can mobilize. So, what is it about cities? And thank you. And citizens, to use Abner and Jonathan Wolff's language, which explains why they tend to be more progressive. And then, what is the sort of the one or two things that city leaders and we can be doing to strengthen the democratic nature of cities? Does anyone want? There's a big questions. Sheila.
So I'll just say, we've talked about some of this. So what distinguishes a city from a rural area or a suburb, let's say?
I'm going to take that and stand up.
Okay, so I think three things. One is, and we've talked about this, diversity, that because of the where economic opportunity, in particular in the last century, is concentrated, it draws. Second is, I think, density. People have to live much closer together. And thirdly, I think proximity to difference. And I think almost all traditional cities have this in common. And so how does that translate to democracy? I mean, I think, so one of the points I was trying to make is that you could just leave that there in a kind of natural market of citizens living and coming together, but you can also nurture that. And I think that that's what we see right now. So, for instance, when the Knicks won, right? Everyone saw the Knicks, New York Knicks, it was all over. The mayor could have just left it to everyone to just watch in their homes. Like, why weren't we just watching our homes like we do games? No. Instead, what he did, it said, let's open up screens all over the city. People gathered on, I mean, literally nurturing this kind of dense, diverse environment. One of many ways. So if we don't have a democratic process or leaders that nurture that and try to bring people together and try to create a common experience in politics, then I think it's just diversity, proximity, and density, and it's hard to translate that into a strong democratic, collective body or spirit, and it's even harder to leverage that. And that was my larger point.
I'm going to come to you in a moment, but Avner, design, planning. I mean, you were talking today about the importance you think that plays. Do you want to say a bit more about that?
Okay.
You have to take the mic.
Thank you. So, yeah, I mean, I think part of the way that authoritarian regimes rule is they use rule and divide. It's a strategy that they use in order to separate us from each other. And part of what's so beautiful in cities is that you get to see each other and you get mixed with others in a way that changes your views. Even, we could say that liberal people are attracted to cities and therefore they're already liberal when they come. But we also know that people who are not that liberal change their views if you follow their voting across through many years. So what is it in the city? And part of it is this mixing. I think that's where urban planning is so important. Urban planners have to understand that the role is political, and that part of it is to protect our democracy and our way of life, which is, the urban vibe, so that people get to see each other, so that people don't live separately. There is a beautiful research by Alex Shu from the United States, where she shows that she studied 300 cities in Brazil, and she shows that in cities like Brasilia, where the affluent live separately from the less affluent, the affluent tend to prefer private solutions to pollution or policing or crime and so on, rather than public policies. Whereas in cities where they live in mixed neighborhood, or at least next to each other, and they have to live together and take the same public transport and so on, they tend to prefer public policies. So I think the role of planners is crucial in this. Thank you.
Do you want to talk a bit about what Amsterdam is doing to strengthen democracy? Or do you want to reflect on why it is that cities like Amsterdam are perhaps more democratic than their nations?
Sure. I really liked what you said about cities being laboratories. Laboratories also for democratic innovations. So Amsterdam has, like other cities, quite some experience with increasing civic participation in various ways. There's even a national regulation that's compulsory for cities to increase civic participation in several ways. One is to increase participation, voice in policy making through different ways, but first of all through, for instance, citizen assemblies or collective meetings where people can speak in about their policies, their ideas about local policies. But another part of that regulation is also government participation. So it's citizens that come up with ideas, projects, cooperatives, ideas how they want to shape their cities, and the government participates in their ideas and tries to listen to their ideas and their way how to design their environment, and tries to facilitate that. So it's kind of reshaping our way of thinking about participation, right? So that about civic participation. But I would add a few more things. Representation. We did some research in Amsterdam about trust in local governance, and there was a huge discrepancy between neighborhoods So first of all, trust was higher in national governments, in local governments than in national governments. But in areas where people are socioeconomically more deprived, vote less for the parties that are represented in government, the trust was also much lower. So I think we should invest much more in representation, that their voices are also represented in local governance. So I know that in the city there's now efforts to really increase local constituencies in neighborhoods that vote for different parties, but that have representation in local neighborhood councils, for instance. 3, and that echoes very much with what you said about institutions. I really believe we need to strengthen institutions. So it's not only about participation, it's not only about representation, it's about really strengthening democratic rule of law institutions, and that means strengthening local media, local schools, local education, science, independent critical thinking, but also civil society. Strengthen civil society is also, it's maybe not an institution, but it's definitely an oversight control of local governance, right? So strengthen the right to assembly, strengthen right to demonstrations, so that the control and checks and balances, and what you reframed it as local constituent power, let's really institutionalize that. And 4th, that has to do with security. I think authoritarians are really doing very well in creating this sense of security and appealing to anxieties. And that's about different kinds of securities, but also social security. So I would say that cities that have, at least in the Netherlands, I don't know how it is in the UK, but have a lot of power in the socio-economic realm, should really invest in social security, in creating this human dignified minimum base for people to live a dignified life and to feel secure and to participate to be able to participate in an equal way. So I think those 4 things would be helpful if cities would invest in those. And I would be very curious if you could, explain a little bit more about the institutionalization. Why did New York actually? Had it institutionalized that other Los Angeles didn't? That helped them resist authoritarian pressure from the federal state. Sorry for taking over.
That's a great question.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So I think a few things. So if you look at, what do Los Angeles and New York have in common? There are kind of sub-local. New York has 59 neighborhood community boards. So that's been there for a long time, has participatory budgeting, has a lot. Los Angeles has some of that same thing. But what I think Mamdani is helping to institutionalize is the mayor's relationship with the public. And it's not just informal, city council meetings or neighborhood meetings, but he's constantly messaging. If there's a snowstorm, if there's a flood, he's in the neighborhoods, he's at various places, and then he's got this office of mass engagement. So he's created in the city an office whose role is to make sure that people stay engaged. So I think there's the hard institutionalization and there's the soft institutionalization. The soft institutionalization is connected to how he operates as a politician. And I think that's the part that may not be durable. Like, does that depend on the next mayor being as talented as he is? The hard institutionalization is something I think he's building on, that has been there, but also building new ways of reaching folks. And I don't think, you don't see the mayors of either Minneapolis or Los Angeles interacting with their constituents in the same way, in leveraging even the tools that they have. So when ICE hits Los Angeles, just like when it hits Minneapolis, you've got, civic groups out there in the street. That's exactly what you saw. And you see the mayor on TV, but that connection between the mayor's office and the city and the resistance, so to speak, is very thin, much thinner than it is in New York. So I think it's what he's building. And also, I think lastly, the delivery on the mayors, and here's Ben Barber's point, right? That if mayors ruled the world, right? Even if you don't believe it, that mayors should or can rule the world, mayors are the elected official closest to us who can deliver public goods and promises. And I think the other thing that I think has allowed him to build this democratic constituent, this collective notion of we're behind you, we're with you, and we'll show up, is that he's delivered on his promises so quickly and efficiently, in a sense where people say, oh, I didn't know that politics could deliver and we could believe and trust politicians. So I think that's an important part of it as well.
Great. Just one more question, then I'll open it up to the floor. We talked a bit about what individual cities can do to strengthen democracy. How can they work together? What should they be doing? I mean, what have you seen which is effective or ineffective? What should they be doing? I mean, I know that Femke is just the new chair of the Pact of Free Cities, which is a global network defending democracy and opposing authoritarianism. I mean, do you want to say anything about that, or what else Amsterdam is doing in this space?
Yeah, sure. So the Pact of Free Cities, I think it emerged in between the cities Budapest and 3 cities in the Visegrad region, right? And Bratislava. Yeah, Bratislava. So they really tried to resist authoritarian national governments by working together and building a strong coalition of progressive cities in repressive environments. So that's, first of all, solidarity amongst each other, but it was also used as a source to lobby and advocate EU institutions, to support them as cities, to protect actually liberties and freedoms in their cities and get funding also from the EU, separate from their own national governments that were actually restricted in budget, in funding by the EU because sanctioned because they were actually not adhering to EU treaties. So I think that is a very smart way of cities to mobilize together for support, for resources outside their national restrictive environments. So I think networking, building city networks, building progressive city networks is important. I think second, speak out, resist. That requires a lot of courage, and mayors and other cities can express solidarity to mayors doing that, right? And when they are attacked again and are attacked again, speak out, be solidarity with each other. I think solidarity is also key that cities can do. And I think that cities can learn a lot with building those local, strong, democratic institutions and practices, I would say, democratic practices. Sharing those examples, learn from each other. That's also through network building. I just forgot to say, for instance, one of the institutions, of course, is super important in building local strong democracies. Of course, the judiciary also, having a strong independent judiciary. And Amsterdam is also investing in local community courts to bring the judiciary also closer to the people. And I won't delve into it because it takes too much time, but I just want to mention that independent, critical institutions like the media, like the judiciary, like a strong, independent, thriving civil society, and learn from each other as cities how we can strengthen those institutions and soft institutions.
That's interesting, because I don't usually think of the judiciary as being something which mayors or city government have much control over. Sheila, do you want to say anything about international networks and what mayors can be doing or city leaders can be doing at the international level?
Sure. So I was privileged to work with Dr. Ben Barber to launch his brainchild, the Global Parliament of Mayors. That was the last chapter of his book on If Mayors Ruled the World. And the idea there was that international institutions like the UN were failing the country, and particularly in a world that had urbanized, and that the decision makers that were closest to that urban world are mayors, and that mayors should form a parliament where they actually govern right? Not just meet and share information, but they govern, they make decisions. So we set this up, launched it in The Hague in 2016. There's a secretariat. It's been an interesting experiment, but like C40 and like other, and C40 started as the top big cities in the world that came together around climate and has been amazingly effective. The idea is to move forward progressive policies and to do so together, and where one mayor, so last night there was a terrific panel with 3 mayors, the mayor of Freetown, the mayor of Phoenix, and then of course the Paris mayor who gave the keynote, and they all made this important point that even if they're in hostile national governments or they're under-resourced, as in Phoenix, that these networks give them the ability, sometimes the fiscal ability, but the ability to do things within their context, to push policies, to build climate infrastructure, et cetera, that they wouldn't have acting alone. So I do think these networks are important in terms of governance, urban governance, in which mayors are really literally jumping over their nation states to kind of govern together in this soft power way.
Brilliant. Okay. Do you want to say anything on that in particular? Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So, following this description of what happened yesterday when the mayors talked here, the word the Bloomberg Foundation was mentioned so often, and he did.
He's funded a lot of this.
This foundation funds a lot of activities in cities, and beautiful activities and very encouraging activities. And I think that cities should learn from each other about such opportunities and also be generous. And we have to see that the competition doesn't destroy the system whereby they get this money. The other thing that I wanted to mention, there is a PhD candidate by the name Kim Noah, who is supervised by Neil Barak, who is here. And she has a beautiful thesis about how cities bypass the state and reach out to international organizations to which states are obliged. So, you know, states have to subject their policies to the demands of the World Bank and to international agreements and to many international systems of cooperation. And that's where cities that are wise can use this organization to force the state to respect the city. Thank you.
Right. I'm going to open it to the floor and then to our online participants. Questions, but I also take comments, and we've got, I mean, I'm looking at a sea of my participants in the workshop who've all got things to say, and they certainly don't have to ask questions, they can make contributions. Somebody over here, this gentleman over here, oh, okay, we're going with Marta first. And introduce you, say who you are.
Thanks. Can you hear me? So I'm Marta Wojciechowska, I'm from King's College, so I'm also one of the co-organizers and participants of the workshop. So I have a question about the idea of institutionalization and the role of institutions at the urban level in terms of democracy and authoritarian age. So I love it, you know, in kind of principle, I love it because obviously it's very important. I do have a question which is kind of devil's advocate question, so it's a sneaky question. So from one perspective, I really love this idea that really the cities need to institutionalize more citizen participation. They need to create institutions for democratic innovation. But kind of the skeptical aspect of this question is that whether really cities are able and eager to devote the power and really delegate to citizens. So cities are really squeezed. They exist in this complex power relations where there is a state, very often an authoritarian state. They already crave their own power. They try to gain independence. How much they are able and eager to delegate fully the power to citizens, whether they really always will be holding to a power. So right. That's a question.
And I'm going to take a few questions at a time. Charlie, and then the person over here afterwards.
Hello, I'm Charlie Hicks. I work at LSE Cities. Also, potentially a sort of provocative question. We recently in the UK had local elections, and there were plenty of cities that voted for a right populist party reform, Farage's party. So, how could that be the case? How could you explain that variation between cities where you have some voting for more progressives, perhaps those that you were referring to, but there's these others, Sunderland, Ipswich, Plymouth and others who are voting reform. How does that fit into your models?
Great. And then sorry to send you all the way over there at the back.
Thanks to all the panelists for the amazing session. My question is kind of related to the last question that was asked. So the election of Mayor Mamdani in New York was one of the great achievements for progressive politics, we can say that, and it aligns with your city as a democratic frontier and authoritarian age kind of thesis. He was openly socialist, Muslim, and pro-Palestine. He still won in New York, which was a big achievement. But I want to kind of contrast that with some of the cities in global south. You take the example of Mumbai and New Delhi. There are mayors who are from Shiv Sena, BJP, which are right-wing parties, authoritarian parties in the national governments. Does it kind of differentiate that this kind of thesis does not work in global south? Or if you can like share your thoughts on like global south versus global north contrast on this thesis. The second question is about the narratives that are usually built on xenophobia or like anti-immigration are usually national politics narratives that migrants are not welcome or something. How can city leadership, mayors, kind of create a welcoming environment at the local level? Because the narratives are built at a different level, but how can the mayors or the city leadership kind of make migrants feel welcomed at their level? So yeah, these are two questions.
I find it quite hard to hear the second point.
Yeah, exactly.
It's hard to hear you. Can you just make the second point very briefly, but with the microphone slightly further away from your mouth?
Sorry. Do you want the last question to be repeated?
Last question, yeah. I can rehearse
So
the first one.
the xenophobic narratives that are built about anti-immigration that are usually at the national level politics they are built, but how can mayors and the city leadership kind of counter that and make immigrants feel welcome in their own right? Because they can't influence the narratives, but how can they, through in their own power, make immigrants feel welcomed at the city level?
So the first question was about what a phenomenon that you detect, particularly in the global south, where you're getting basically right-wing authoritarian populists being elected to run large cities. And the second one was about what sort of arguments is it that mayors and city governments should be making?
Or what sort of initiatives can they take to make the migrants feel welcome?
To make migrants feel like they own power. Okay, great. Okay. Do you want? So we've got three questions. One about the city leaders really want to give away power.
Yeah. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
One about, and then two really about, why is it that actually there's plenty of examples of citizens voting for right-wing populist authoritarian governments. I don't know if anyone wants to have a go at answering me those.
Go ahead. Yeah. You start and then work down. Yeah.
Okay, so, hey, I want to say something. When we say cities, there's a variety of cities. There are small cities, there are mid-sized cities, there are big cities. There are cities which Daniel Bell and I called cities with an ego. Metropolitan cities that think of themselves as something really important. And there are genuinely cosmopolitan cities. So one thing I want to say is that there is correlation between the city being cosmopolitan and big, and people defining themselves, their identity, by the city rather than by the nation or the state. So the more cosmopolitan, there are parameters according to which you can say whether a city is cosmopolitan or not. And the more cosmopolitan the city is, the more likely it is that their residents will define themselves as residents of the city rather than as citizens of the state. This is a new paper by Mudovnik and other members who wrote it, scholars who wrote it with him. So it's true that in many small cities and rural cities, there is higher support for right-wing voters, for right-wing parties. I also want to say that we should be very cautious about analyzing the results, because we know in political science that when the citizens are not satisfied with the government, they send messages when there are by-elections. So in the States, that's very common, right? Or when somebody, God forbid, dies in the parliament and you have to re-elect the member of parliament, the citizen would send a message and would not necessarily vote for the person that with whom they agree. So I'm worried about this election results, but I have to take it with a grain of salt. We have to look at it, I don't know, a year from now and see what it meant. Yeah, I guess I'll stop here.
So I want to join these questions together. So, and it's about kind of what power cities have and why would they give up their power, and how does that translate to more conservative or right-wing politics. So I think back to my point, why would cities do this, give away their power? One question is, where do they get their power from? My point is that it's not just a top-down that they don't want to give up. Actually, they don't have that. So where do mayors get their power? They're getting their power from their constituents. And they are feeding into what they think their constituents want. And, you know, Elena and I in LabGov, we've done some empirical work on looking at, through our co-cities work, you know, where do we detect these kind of co-governance models where you have what we call an enabling state, an enabling city that's enabling this kind of, in Bologna, pacts of collaboration, or in, you know, Barcelona or Madrid. I can name a number of cities that do this, that are devolving, let's say, some of their power down. And so they're getting their power from the same place they're sending power back. So that's what, now, that obviously doesn't apply to places that don't have robust democracies or don't have systems in check. So that, and there are in the US conservative cities, right? And there are what are called sanctuary cities against gun restrictions. So there are cities that call themselves, the Second Amendment protects the right to bear arms in, you know, in the US, and there are constituencies that believe that they should have more rights to bear, and there are cities that say, we're not going to follow US law, we are a sanctuary city from more progressive laws. So this cuts both ways, right? This cuts both ways. This is why we can't romanticize cities. And is that a problem for progressive politics? Yes. Is that a problem for democracy? I'm not sure. I'm not sure, right? So that's what I have to say about that.
So I also like to respond to the question of power sharing and about the last one, how can cities counter xenophobic narratives? About the power sharing, yeah, it really depends also where you look in cities. You say, are cities willing to share power? It really depends. Like, we did a lot of research in the local neighborhoods where the local city officials, but also the frontline workers are really trying to work in a co-creative way with local communities in shaping the neighborhoods, in co-developing policies, in co-creating common structures. They're extremely willing to actually do it together, and it's extremely challenging. And they also run counter to their own systems that are maybe not so willing, or, you know, that are still struggling to share power or to do it in an equitable manner. But yeah, if participation only means I want to, you know, get buy-in in policies that we have already determined, it will be completely a failure and it will have a backlash. So we're learning and we're researching, a lot of researchers are really doing ethnographic research, how those participatory processes look like, how can we do this in a more equitable manner, and yeah, really appreciate knowledge and actually friction and contestation instead of, oh, we're working towards consensus or buy-in. Can I just respond to the xenophobic narratives? I think cities can do a lot to counter xenophobic narratives by national politicians. It really depends on city leaders to do that, who are willing to do that. But we had some really great examples where our national politicians scapegoated people with immigrant backgrounds, said they had to integrate after there were incidents. And some of our deputy mayors, they started a campaign. Hey, I'm actually from an immigrant background. Do I still need to integrate? You know, I was a teacher, I was a deputy mayor, I was this. So it's really, there's a role for city leaders to play to counter those narratives. That's one, in, you know, in narratives, in values, in normative way, but also through policies. So, for instance, cities have a lot of power in receiving asylum seekers and in hosting and sheltering undocumented migrants. And there's a real resistance at the national level, and some cities want to go beyond the minimal levels at national level. Governments want to give in terms of shelter, and they refer to international law, to international human rights law standards, to say no, this is actually what international law requires of us governments to shelter, provide shelter to undocumented migrants, or to decriminalize undocumented migrants or homeless people. So I think cities are already doing this, city leaders, and using other international sources of law also to legitimize more progressive policies to counter not only xenophobic narratives, but also xenophobic policies.
I know Sheila wants to come back in, but I'm going to take a few more questions, and then
sure.
you can... are there questions online? Sure, okay. After I'm just going to take some online questions first.
Do you want a couple questions?
Yeah.
I think it's working.
So the first question is, how do you think that the suppression or imprisonment of mayors like the mayor of Istanbul affects the democratic frontier in cities?
Sorry?
Could you...
Stand up, that's fine, just stand up.
Yeah.
Okay. So first question is, how do you think that the suppression or imprisonment of mayors like the mayor of Istanbul affects this democratic frontier in cities? A second question is, are city dwellers quicker and easier to influence and therefore more susceptible to propaganda and disinformation than traditionally minded rural residents? So provocation there, suggesting that in some parts of the world, like for example in India, the BJP movement was mostly an urban middle-class phenomenon. I'll leave it there, and I can know.
Okay. And Jim here has a question as well.
Thanks very much. Thank you very much for some fantastic and thought-provoking ideas. We've spoken a lot about politics and philosophy and cultural things and social things. And it struck me when Professor Foster answered the question about the difference between Los Angeles and New York. Does form have anything to do with these things? You know, we've got about 5,000 or 6,000, you could argue about this all night, but maybe there are thousands of cities. And I don't think it's possible for you to take one city, like take Barcelona, and stick that plan in North Dakota and replicate Barcelona. And that is a very specific form. And it's very, you know, I mean, you could argue you like it or not, you know, I think it's got better over the years. Used to consist largely of these huge urban motorways and car parking, and the recent, well, not recent, but initiatives that have taken several decades have actually transformed it and made it really rather special, you know, and it's become a bit of an urbanist's.
So that's just, yeah, so a question about how urban form might shape.
So yeah, and also it's about, you know, are you able to resist authoritarianism in a place like New York easier because it's dense and urban and it promotes sort of interaction, whereas in Los Angeles, you know, it's all spread out, you know, maybe like Kinshasa is a huge city, but it's all low rise and it takes you 2 hours or 3 hours to get across from one side to the other. Do the professors think form plays some sort of role?
I mean, when you're saying that, and this is partly a response to Martha's question as well, I mean, I'm thinking of Avner's point about the sort of the logic of sovereignty, the national nation-state sovereignty, which works very well in a court of law or a school playground or a prison or an army, but is very easily resisted at cities, you know, and I mean, it's no coincidence that, you know, when a country's invaded, you know, it's always the cities that hold out, because power is very, very distributed, and I mean, so it's not just about mayors giving powers to communities. I mean, communities have a huge ability to take power and use power in cities in a way that they probably don't in other forms of settlement.
And also to give it to mayors, right?
And to give it to mayors, right?
Yeah.
So there were some provocative questions, and I've forgotten what they were because I got involved in. But you remember?
There was a question about the mayor of Istanbul and how does it
That's right.
Being in prison.
challenge the idea of cities being frontiers of democracy. I mean, this is authoritarianism at its largest, right? Just a democratically elected mayor who is progressive, who just put him in jail on false terrorism charges. So I think there, yeah, cities cannot resist. I mean, he tried to resist, but this is just authoritarianism at its largest, and it's difficult. We have to resist, but I don't think cities can always win. But other cities can be solidaire and mobilize to release him, put pressure on the national governments, through their own governments, to lobby to release him, to do trial watches, to really, stand around other mayors who are being repressed. So I think that's one thing that I would reply to that question. There was a second question on city dwellers being more susceptible to misinformation. Is there anyone of you who wants to reply to that?
Misinformation.
Misinformation, yes. I'll reply, while you think about that, I'll reply to the urban forum. So I would just say, it could be about urban forum, but I don't think so. So I think there are two things that may be determinative. One is how the local government is structured. It is true that Los Angeles, the city of Los Angeles, is quite small compared to the county. And the mayor only rules over a small city, right? And all the areas outside of so that is a difference, whereas New York City has a much more centralized form of government that covers all the boroughs, right? I mean, there are borough presidents, et cetera. But I actually don't think that's the difference in the example I gave. The point I'm trying to make is that the collective can be nurtured into a form of constituent power. And I think Mamdani is doing something that is quite unique. So he just announced he's going to have a radio show like I believe it was President Eisenhower did, and Mayor LaGuardia way back then. There, he's going to talk to every night or every week. He's going to have an open radio show, and that's on top of he's constantly on Instagram, explaining what he's doing, celebrating things. It's on top of all the. So he is, and then it's on top of the institutionalization of ways of bringing people into City Hall and then delivering back to them. So what I'm suggesting is whether this is a template for something that he is nurturing and then he's leveraging to win elections, to kick out 3 incumbents 2 days ago against the Democratic establishment and against the governor and the head of Congress trying to keep those incumbents. He's got something he's nurturing and leveraging that is not replicable everywhere. I'm not suggesting that. But I don't think it has to do with urban form. I think it has to do the way in which he thinks about his constituent power and the way he thinks about collective democratic power in the city as a democratic space. That's my thesis.
I think it's about both.
Probably. All right. Yeah.
Unless Avner or Doutje got something that they particularly want to say, I don't want to end late, so I'm going to wind up. Unless Avner, you're looking undecided.
One sentence. Okay. In reply to the question about what cities can do that states cannot do about immigration, according to the European regulation, if a person lands in an immigrant or a refugee lands in a particular state, this state has to be in charge of dealing with his request or her request. So there was a period in which you had a lot of people crossing the Mediterranean from Libya in boats. And the governments of Italy and Spain became hysterical, and they said, just push them back. And the mayors of Barcelona, Ada Colau and Palermo and Naples decided that they would accept them despite the order of the government. And I'm quite ashamed and embarrassed that I don't remember the name of the mayor, but there was a mayor of a small city in Italy that went to prison for several years because he insisted on hiding these refugees in his small city. And the interesting fact is that they got support from the population of the cities. So I don't know whether it's sharing power or, whether it's bottom up or top down, but the fact was that the population of these cities supported these policies, which were in conflict with the policies of the nation or of the state. Thank you.
Brilliant. Well, that's a great,
Yeah, it is a great
illustration, a great story to end on. So we're going to wind up here. Thank you so much for coming. I'm very excited about, I just feel that we're in the foothills of developing new thinking, new research about political values and cities. But I'm so pleased to have my fellow travellers with us here in London. Look forward to working with them again. I'm so pleased that you could all come and join us this evening, and I'd like to thank our panellists in the normal way. Thank you.